when you watched an athlete, man or woman, or a broadcaster, go through a tough time, what I think our audience would love to hear from you is what you learned about the great performers, how they rise above, how they push through, because they go through some of the same struggles that we go through, just in front of more people with a lot more pressure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an awesome question. For me, and I was right there when Smoltzy transitioned from starter to closer to back to starter, but those are the moments that I saw all the time. And what I found was that they felt fear and feel fear, and they get scared and they get nervous and all those things just like we do as business people when we're walking into a big meeting or we're raising money as a business owner or whatever. But they lean into it and they realize that, yes, I have a pit in my stomach. Yes, I'm scared to death. Yes, I'm nervous. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to execute. And they do it by believing in themselves first, right? They believe it by reminding themselves that they belong there. And I had a baseball player once that was struggling, and I literally put a 2.5-minute video together of just, he was a hitter, of one unbelievable hit after another, like one unbelievable moment, the dugout guys coming out, the fans going crazy, right? Just awesome little moments. And I said, dude, you can do this, right? And so as business people, I always tell business people, sometimes we've got to do those kinds of things for ourselves too, so that we can pivot from fear to opportunity, to recognize that this pit equals growth, that those moments are gifts, and that on the other side of it is usually something that's going to take us to another level. And when Smoltz went, I was right there when he did that, and what I saw was a guy sort of embrace that change, recognize that he didn't need to do it, but he wanted to do it. And by embracing change, right, which is something that a lot of us as people are super uncomfortable with, which is normal. But John leaned into that change and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And then he that first season as a closer, he led the National League in saves with 55 saves. He went into the Hall of Fame as not just one of the best starters, but one of the best closers. And John was a really rhythmic guy about the way he started as a starter. I mean, he would sleep in a hyperbaric chamber in between starts. He had his golf game all lined up in between every start, right? I mean, it's a totally different role. Now you're in the bullpen, wait for the phone to ring, getting warmed up. Sometimes you go in, sometimes you don't. Yeah. But I think it actually helped his career and helped his arm because he probably threw less pitches, actually.
Sure.
So, I think what I consistently saw was guys embrace these challenges and lean into them instead of run from them. Yeah. And that to me was probably, one of the biggest things I learned. And John was a guy that certainly taught me that firsthand.
Yeah. I want you to talk about the continual learning process. Now, we know this on this program that we talk to leaders all the time. And I constantly am asking them, how are they growing? How are they learning? Because no matter how high they are up the ladder, you know this, Molly, they've got to continue to learn. Yeah. You know this now. You're in the business space now. But I would love to know, how are the top athletes, the top coaches? You've represented so many of them, Tom Izzo, Doc Rivers. We're talking about two of the greats. How are they continually learning so that they stay on top? Because there's always competition. There's always a hot young coach. There's always another program. What have you learned about these great performers on how they continue to learn and grow?
Yeah. I'd say two really big things. Number one, they really park their ego and allow curiosity to sort of rise to the top, right? Mm. So, I mean, the other day, Izzo picked up the phone and called the softball coach at Michigan because, she's had incredible success and he wanted to learn. I mean, Gino Auriemma was on my podcast, and he told me once that, he picked up the phone and called Popovich and said, hey, listen, let me talk to you about team and let me talk to you about. And so, Kobe Bryant consistently was picking up the phone and reaching out to great people in all fields, in all spaces, so that, he could learn. So they park their ego and know that other people can help them get a little bit better. And they're not afraid to ask for advice. So, they sort of have to park the ego to probably be able to do that, right? And then the second thing is they're incredibly curious. They know that there's always a way to get a little bit better, that if they do a little bit more, if they listen to one more podcast, if they read one more book, if they ask more questions, they're just curious beyond belief. And so they continue to consume content so that they can learn and show up a little bit better every day. And they realize it's like Saban talks about, right? It's a process. And they recognize that, there's something that maybe they did 5 years ago that they would never consider doing now, but they're probably doing things today that through curiosity, they'll learn that they could do better in a couple years. So, for your audience, right, for entrepreneurs, for leaders, to me, parking our egos so that we can ask tough questions to great leaders that they're in and outside of our space allows us to grow, and to stay curious unlocks new levels of capacity and growth for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about two big words. I know you're passionate about teaching around these words and the difference between the two: achievement and fulfillment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Huge difference, right? I mean, to me, achievement is sort of going after the wrong things, right? It's one of my really good friends is Dr. Jim Lair, and he talks about how he worked with 17 number ones in the world, and they achieved a lot, right? I mean, they were number one in the world in tennis or, whatever, and they were miserable, and because they weren't fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And, fulfillment means we've got to get really clear on why we're here. And I know you talk about that, right? And you've got to get really clear on what your purpose is and what really, you're born to do, and what are your gifts, and that's what's going to fill us up. And oftentimes fulfillment comes through giving and serving other people. And I know personally for me, the greatest moments for me as an agent were the moments when not the biggest contracts. I mean, one of them was a deal where we got a guy 10 more days in the big leagues, so he got his pension for the rest of his life. Yeah. And it was just a silly little deal to get him his pension, but that was fulfillment, right? When you're doing a $50 million deal, so what, right? Like, it's all about changing people's lives. And when you can change a guy's life because he gets his pension for the rest of his life, that's cool. So huge difference between the two. And, I encourage people to spend time getting really clear on what does fulfillment look like for them. And that's why I think we see athletes who they achieve so much, but maybe they struggle inside letting go of that game. And that's why I'm super passionate about really disconnecting the athlete and the person and recognizing that there's two things there. That there's John Smoltz or Ernie Johnson Jr. or Doc Rivers or Tom Izzo. There's them as the coach or the broadcaster or the baseball player, but then there's them as the father and the husband and the son and the neighbor and the church member. And that's two totally different people that need to have fulfillment in sort of those two lanes, and so that when one goes away, which is going to be the sports one, right, that they're still whole as a person.